Oh, I can feel it. This one's gonna be fun. So, out of the gate, look, if you've been hanging around the archive for a bit, you know how I feel about literary theory, criticism, and analysis. If this is your first time, boy, what a video to jump in on. But just remember, analysis is fluid, analysis is subjective, nothing is really right or wrong, and we're all just here for a good, informative time. We'll talk more about analysis itself later. As I replayed Dusk recently to turn my body off, this feral thought screamed through my brain about 3 chapters in. So I decided to make this absolutely bat video, and now you're here. That's it. That's the lore. This is a quick and dirty breakdown, a crime of passion, and will surely be an assault on all of your senses. Sound good? Let's have fun with it. Oh, and spoiler alert? The game's like 95% boomer shooter, 4.9% abject horror, and 0.1% plot, but hey, I get it. Spoilers ahead. Okay, back to it. Quick primer. White supremacy is a belief system in which 1. White-skinned people are superior to all other colored-skinned people, and 2. That white-skinned people should, by this belief, dominate all other people, and that they have the right and freedom to impose that domination by force, whether through outright murder, policy changes, and the establishment of social norms. It's manifested in a number of different ways throughout our social and political systems, stretching back in time to European colonialism, American slavery and the Civil War, the eugenics movement and Nazism, South African apartheid, up through the present with excessive law enforcement violence directed at American citizens, among other things. An important reminder to the other white folk hanging around here: white supremacy, despite its name, does not benefit all white people. Like everything weaponized by people in power, it is a concept used to benefit the historically white people in power. Consider 2 examples. Historically, Nazi Germany targeting Jews and gay people. They might be white, but according to Nazism's eugenics-based white supremacy, they're not the right white. More recently, white capitalists will swoop into affordable rural regions, buy up giant swaths of land for their industry, and start to choke crucial resources out from local population, like in Pierce, Arizona, populated largely by white people. Or even when a Walmart pops up in a community, no matter that community's demographic breakdown. Walmart destroys the other local offerings with its pricing structure, choking out the homegrown connection in favor of siphoning a community's capital out of the community and, ultimately, into the coffers of its white leadership. Today, white supremacy manifests as a series of privileges granted to white-skinned people, despite equal rights being the law of the land on paper. These privileges can be financial, social, vocational, political, legal, or educational, and not always granted to people who have a different breakdown of melanin in their bodies. White supremacy is perpetuated by people in power: politicians, police, bankers, brokers, board members, councils, capitalists, neighbors, generally white themselves, but not always. Though more uncommon, non-white white supremacists may be trying to ride on coattails of the people in charge, thinking they can weaponize white supremacy for their own, generally self-serving, goals. White supremacy has been, and will be, redirected on anyone of any color, white included, who makes an effective scapegoat. Anything to bolster the white supremacists sitting at the top, no matter where they define as the top. At its core, white supremacy is as much a group of people with tiki torches and an axe to grind as much as it is a system designed to benefit some far more than others, based solely on the color of their skin. Okay, that was heavy, but you got it now. We're on the same page. Let's get into Dusk. There are 4 main elements to touch on in this breakdown. Each of Dusk's 3 main episodes, the foothills, the facilities, and the nameless city, and its main protagonist, referred to as the intruder or Dusk Dude. I will refer to him as Dusky, because there are people in the world named Dusty, and honestly, that's close enough for me. First, the foothills. it does not take long before Dusky escapes from his rural captors and encounters a couple of white-cloaked, white-hooded, pointy-headed enemies. Now, when you think about white-cloaked, white-hooded, pointy-headed people in rural Americana, who generally comes to mind? Say it together. 1, 2, the Klan! Exactly. So, when we think about the Ku Klux Klan, where do we envision them? Geographically, we default to the southern United States. Sorry, y'all. But in fairness, it should be noted the Klan was, and is, active throughout the North too, notably in my home state of Indiana. Anyway, when we think of the southern United States, we think of Florida and Louisiana, swamps and marshes, average citizens staring down apex predators as the norm and getting close to one of God's sharpest natural clamps, alligators, the likes of which this white-hooded cult has domesticated and attached guns to. The Klan has a hierarchy of officers, like many other organizations. At the top are wizards, derived from the fantastic masters of the arcane arts, those weavers of fate, those wielders of the elements. Elements like fire. And you know what? Leave it to a Klansman and their shallow showmanship to get as far as making fireballs before they just crap out and decide, yeah, that's good enough for me, nuance be damned. And within Dusk's cult leadership, there sit the Duke brothers, no doubt pulled from David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the Klan and white supremacist in word, writing, and action. There are too many dots all connecting to what we know, what we've seen, what we've learned about in reality. All that said, Dusky encounters these white-cloaked, white-hooded, pointy-headed enemies that are oddly, violently reminiscent of the Ku Klux Klan, attacking us on sight with the Klan's intimidatory weapon of choice, fire. And what does Dusk all but tell us to do with these white-cloaked, white-hooded, pointy-headed enemies? Yes, all together. 1, 2, pump their heads and tummies full of explosive metal flying at speeds upwards 2,000 miles an hour, occasionally in a pellet spread format until they are dead and jibbed. When presented with the overt manifestation of white supremacy, Dusk gives us a direct avenue to push back against it, both directly by way of shells full of metal, and metaphorically against everything white supremacy stands for. Next, the facilities. Creeping around the latter levels of the foothills, Dusky starts to encounter masked soldiers protecting gated areas and structures with immediate lethal force. Big shoot-first questions are for commies energy. This carries on throughout Dusky's push deeper into the facilities. You are an instant, immediate target of violence for a faceless collective. And what more prevalent faceless collective is there in our world than the government? And when you think about the powers perpetuating white supremacy, groups like the Klan are an easy, visually striking first thought, but how did the Klan come to be? Lenience, allowance, and sometimes encouragement from our governing bodies. Though our political system is full of more and more aspiring and fallen reality stars, there is still a faceless, unknown quality to our governing bodies, and not necessarily at the federal level. State, local, and regional groups, despite being closer and more accessible to us, perpetuate the most harm at the smallest scale, in turn empowering those in higher positions to make grander and more sweeping changes in service not to all people, but in perpetuation of white supremacy. Just like these soldiers in Dusk, government officials hide behind bureaucracy and processes. A singular vote in a law passing collectively, or the latest judge in a line of other judicial processes to say, yeah, this is absolutely cool in the eyes of the law, because the law, has never been used against people and citizenry before. A faceless enclave shunting individual accountability in favor of collective perpetuity. Within Dusk, the initial conflict between the cult and the soldiers seems to be a one-off, a scuffle and a skirmish that does not define either of their wants or missions. The further Dusky digs into their operation, the more intertwined he learns the two factions are. The government has created installations, engines, turbines, vast machines used to empower itself and its tenuous allies, the cult. These constructions a mirror to the figurative structures upheld in the name of white supremacy. Policies, laws, what is deemed acceptable in the eyes of society, all fueling its various proxies throughout society. The government is an ever-present element of our modern America, and a tool of white supremacy more faceless than those who wear masks. It uses its power, its ability to shape, decide, and dictate what is right and wrong in the eyes of the law in order to lift white citizens ever upward, while taking every opportunity, overt and underhanded alike, to downtrod upon others. So, in the absence of a service that works to protect us, we instead strive to dismantle it, brick by brick, structure by structure, agent by agent, even embedding ourselves within that same structure in order to effect change. We break it down just enough to force our way inside, hoping to enact positive change from within. But to enact that change without a coup, we are left trying to curry favor from a nebulous them, a formless other. And that takes us to the Nameless City. Dusky has mowed through the cult's white-hooded operatives, pushed back against the faceless government agents, and sent horrifying monstrosities back from the void between dimensions from whence they came. And in the end, at the great tear between worlds, is the source of the power. The outer god, Nyarlathotep. One step further, what is Nyarlathotep's origin? H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. And H.P. Lovecraft himself? A known white supremacist. Coincidence? I think not. The outer god taunts Dusky in the final moments of the adventure.
Who did you expect at the end of all of this? God? The devil, perhaps?
White supremacy is not a product of any faith. Neither God nor the devil empowers their followers directly. They merely offer signposts by which the followers can, follow. White supremacy is crafted and perpetuated by man alone, even as they slander God's name to further their mission. Yet only something fundamentally removed from our individual lives would empower a group like the cult, a disparate multitude somehow forced into a singular direction. And that begs the question. What is Nyarlathotep, the bestower of world-changing power, in this situation? Nyarlathotep is us. We are the collective voting power given a formless, nebulous visage in Nyarlathotep, granting power to those who seek it and curry our favor. In life, the competition between leaders has been in policy and promises. In more recent times, it has been a battle of fear and threats. But in a simpler, easier world, Dusky overtakes the previous cult leader, proving himself to subvert the structure, gain the votes, and have the power to enact change, even by removing that destructive power from the equation entirely. The cult and government work in tandem to perpetuate white supremacy, but in doing so, threaten to rot the entire world for their mission, seeking power and digging themselves too deep in pursuit of more. The pursuance of white supremacy is itself the most destructive cult in history, for left unchecked or allowed to advance, it will continue to metastasize and ultimately destroy everything. That's the thing about the outer gods and the general voting population alike. They will grant power to anyone fool enough to summon them and win them over, no matter what the summoner's end goal is. It just takes the right words, whether through a promised exchange the summoner never intends to keep, or the political fear-mongering of someone who looks different than you taking your jobs. But there's the other thing about Nyarlathotep and voters. They are fickle, liable to change their mind and bestow power on someone else, someone who they find more impressive or who makes better promises every couple years. The only way to destroy those with power before that power destroys everything is to remove them from power. That has meant clawing it out of their grubby political offices, being intolerant of intolerance itself, recognizing that we are not the other, they are. We may not be able to destroy white supremacy as it currently exists, but we can at least take away its power, even as little as piece by piece. Lastly is Dusky himself, providing that 0.1% of plot I mentioned earlier. As far as players can tell, Dusky lived in the town of Dusk with a wife and child. At some point, Dusky left town for reasons unknown, and the cult rose to power. Naturally, people opposed them, as good people do when faced with evil. This included, in some capacity, Dusky's wife and child. For their resistance, their house was burned down with them inside, a classic and familiar tactic of the Ku Klux Klan. Dusky returned sometime later, devastated and traumatized before being captured by the cult and kicking off the game properly. We can imagine that Dusky and his family shared values, so even if the cult hadn't killed his family, Dusky would have opposed the cult all the same. Lastly, from the moment Dusky breaks free of his bonds and starts pushing back against his captors, he brandishes his signature weapons, sickles. Despite its bladed quality, sickles were not created as weapons, but as an agricultural tool, one Dusky is clearly and immediately comfortable using. By its default use, Dusky was never really a fighter. He was just a farmer. Dusky is, by all surface counts, an average person whose life was upended by the cult's actions and those that empowered them. Average people are the ones who stand to lose the most when white supremacy has their cards on the table. To oppose them morally is to suffer physically. Like any bully, white supremacists will target the people that are most accessible to them. Not leaders, but neighbors, citizens, the average person. The journey of Dusk is not simply one of revenge, but a crusade of righteous, equitable fury by an average man with nothing left to lose, focused with laser precision on the people who enact their violent will upon others because of what they alone believe. As an interactive experience, Dusk gives players oodles of manifestations of white supremacy and the tools with which to dismantle them in a pure escapist fantasy fueled by gunpowder and iron. It's not overtly civil or subtle in its approach, but then again, neither is white supremacy. At least Dusk puts people on the right side of the fight. Still hanging on? Cool. Let's talk about literary analysis. I know it's come up before, but as a reminder, literary analysis, or criticism, or studies, is the study, evaluation, and interpretation of literature. It's taking things a different direction than just experiencing the literature. You're not just watching the movie, reading the book, or playing the game for the experience of it. You're looking for something more, trying to make sense of a work outside of what is presented to its audience. By that logic, RoboCop isn't just a slick sci-fi movie. It's a condemnation of capitalist corporatization and its dehumanizing impact both individually and socially. Twilight isn't just a supernatural love story. It's a pedestal upon which tenets of the Mormon faith are placed in high regard. And Dusk isn't just a wild, violent romp across rural Pennsylvania and beyond, but is a condemnation of white supremacy and its followers' actions in pursuit of it. Literary analysis doesn't change a work. It just gives people a new way to look at, experience, and consider that literature. I can still sit down and enjoy a movie, a book, or a game on its own merit, removed from literary analysis. There is nothing wrong with that, and nothing inherently better about interpreting literature to glean new meaning from it. They are both different ways to experience the same literature. To that end, how is analysis used? How can we narrow down analysis into something more manageable? Think of analysis as the medium, like books or games, and the approaches as genres. There are formalist approaches dealing in the elements of a narrative or story and interpreting those, political approaches examining a story in light of or in response to any number of social and political movements, psychological approaches digging into the author's background, intent, and how it manifested in the literature, and race and sexuality approaches, studying a work from a particular identity-based perspective. Each of those approaches break down into theories, studies, and criticisms, or subgenres, allowing for a more specific focus. It should be noted that this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but it does lay a solid foundation. Analysis can be a feeling you get, notes that you scribble down and revisit later as pieces you didn't consider before start snapping together. Sometimes analysis is just for the analyzer, but other times we'll put our thoughts out there for others. It's not so much to rally people around a cause as much as it is giving them a new way to consider things, a way that helps them make sense of a work or appreciate it differently or appreciate it more than they did before. Above all else, literary analysis allows a person to zero in on aspects of a work they consider the most important. What someone deems important can be a result of their own identity or lived experience to a response as they try to grapple with something happening in their life or in the world. In short, it is subjective, individually based. That's why someone would take a game like Dusk and, even unintentionally at first, zero in on the symbolism and historical connections of white supremacy and its ill impact. What you choose to do with literature is entirely up to you. There's no right or wrong way to interpret a work, but there are lenses that people may not agree with or appreciate, especially in as divisive of times as we live. More than anything, the act of analysis itself may not click for you until you experience a work that you, subjectively, find worth analyzing. The literary canon in education sets a foundation, yes, but if those works don't vibe with a person, they may be less inclined to think outside that box and analyze other literature. That was me throughout all of high school, all of college, with precious few exceptions. These works don't stir anything in me, so maybe I'm just not cut out for analysis. But literature is vast and ever expanding. There is something out there that you can sink into. There are new creators making new stories and new experiences all the time. But day's end, maybe it's as easy as revisiting something you already know. Boot up an old game that you once relegated to the Boomer Shooter Fun Times folder, get through a couple levels, look at it a little differently the second go around. You never know what you'll find, even, or especially, when you're not looking for it at first.